Okay, today we're with my new friend this year, Christopher. Um, we're doing this podcast series mainly because we're interviewing the people within the Conduit community. Um, it's not really about you know, listens and views and advertisements and stuff. It's actually to share amongst ourselves. I've been lucky enough to create and be part of this community. We're about 200. I think you were 209 of our 213 people around the world, all doing a very interesting things when it comes to innovation for the real world, from deep tech to hardware to AI, physical tech, robotics. But I'd rather start with, before we talk about where you came from, Christopher as a kid, what are you doing now? I think the most interesting thing is, we met about a year ago. I think it's about a year ago. And it was because Susan and I were exploring what is all the buzz about in the Nordics. We ended up in Copenhagen this year about 4 or 5 times. What was really interesting was, we knew the Nordics has a great reputation around academic prowess, right? Everyone very smart, well educated. But we weren't really sure what was happening in the hardware space. But Susan was on a board of a consumer audio company out there. And as we started to get more and more kind of like double clicking on where in the world is some of the best physical tech, AI, quantum, technologies of where are these thinkers coming from? And I remember one of the podcasts we had earlier and one coming forward are a few people from Microsoft Quantum. And over the last like 4 or 5 years, they would be talking about these acquisitions that Microsoft was making, in the Nordics. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right. And they're building up this quantum team, these teams and experts. And so we started on this journey about a year ago to discover not only what's going on out there, but what does Conduit mean? What are we doing here? We're trying to build something kind of different and unique in a way of how do we pair, we call it like micro PE, VC, venture building, and how do we focus that on technologies for the real world, physical tech or hard tech or deep tech or whatever you want to call it these days. I think we all have different definitions. And that brought me to you in your office, actually. We were working through the foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark, and they were taking us around and basically said, hey, how many days do you have while you're here? I said, I got 2 days. And they set up a list of names, and you were the first name on the first day of, here are the people you need to meet when you come to Copenhagen, that you just need to understand, one, how is it to be a founder or an innovator in the physical tech or physical industries? What are the challenges here, but who's also going to tell you the truth? So we met. I think we've become really good friends ever since. We are in the works of talking about how to expand ourselves into that region now because of this conversation. So I'm excited to have this chat, and I'll stop talking after a while. But I would love to start with, you have a different perspective of the world too. So really understanding, like, yes, where's young Christopher come from? How did you get into technology? But I think you have a unique story rather than the typical, I went to school, I became a mechanical engineer, I worked on the hardware thing at Apple, and now I'm doing this thing. I'd love to learn more about your journey up until now. And then
Mhm.
we can dive into kind of some of the amazing projects if you want to share them, or if you can share them, because there's some pretty interesting stuff there. And then really look at your outlook on the Nordics and how we can we have this philosophy around better together. How do we bring our platform, our market size and access and experience from the US and pair it with European talent and actually find better ways to grow together. So I know you have a very strong opinion in that, and so I'd love to just hear your thoughts. So I'll hand it over to you, Christopher, and welcome.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Amish, and always nice to be part of a community that goes beyond your own backyard, right? I think true talent it comes when you mix a lot of different things, not only perspectives but also cultures and approaches. So I really value the opportunity to kind of be part of something way bigger than just what I was brought up in. So you can say my journey as an entrepreneur slash innovator is that I was challenged early on in my career. So actually all the way back to high school. And I was kind of faced with this traditional Danish approach of saying either you go high school, university, or you do not. And the bulk ends up going that way. So we are one of the societies with the highest fraction of academic educated people, so around 20% take a long academic career. And I was told by my student counselor that that was not for me. And I was like, out of spite, I was like, I will prove it is. So I decided just to take the most difficult study line I could to prove them wrong. Right. And then my first mark, the first grade I got was an A plus, or back in the day it was called a 13 here in Denmark. And that kind of gave me the kind of the appetite for more. And then, within the first year of my university sprint, I had the opportunity to work on a small hardware platform that would structure glass, so like nano imprinting, that is used to making meta lenses for smartphone screens, for optical lenses, for virtual reality glasses, or even augmented reality glasses. And that company or that technology was spun into an existing spin-out of the university back in 2006. And that company last year got acquired by a big Taiwanese company, and a little bit of one of the good journeys of how hard tech can be spun out of university. And that kind of steered me towards where academia meets commercial. Um, and I did that my entire research career. I had like one leg in doing research and the other one in how do we actually turn the knowledge and ideas into actual products and products into markets. And then I had the privilege of forming the team that initiated Skylab at the Technical University of Denmark, which became kind of the largest spin-off hub in Danish academia. It was kind of the blueprint that has been used across Europe for how to do knowledge transfer at scale across academic institutions. So if you look at the Technical University of Munich, they mirror many of the same processes we implemented back in 2013. Then I went out and did private sector work for a decade, figuring out how to help inventors take what they believe to be crazy ideas and make them not so crazy into products, and hopefully those products into supply chains. And I had the privilege of working across some of the major markets that are very far away from, little Denmark. So I have set up distribution and manufacturing in India, in China. I have set up supply chains through Africa and Northern America, and of course, the home market of Europe. So you can say that, yes, on paper, I look like a traditional trained engineer, but my career is anything but traditional, right? It's been heavily influenced when the technology started meeting the markets, right? And that hypersensitivity to process optimization has also led to me being part of the team that kind of built the framework for doing knowledge transfer at the university at scale at my current position, where we effectively took the black box negotiation strategy that most universities have used for decades and turned it into a predictable, transparent formula that both sides can kind of talk openly about, so we can arrive at a conclusion much faster that everybody can actually be at. And that has been adopted now as a national standard here in Denmark. It is currently been evaluated by law to be implemented, as a national standard. So
Yeah, so lots of things there. We can dive into a few things. How did you so as you go through your academic kind of journey, first of all, spite is one of my favorite motivators too. As a person who works in hardware, it's always especially in the VC landscape, it's why that's dumb, it's too hard. Like spite's a great example, and I think what we're trying to do at Conduit is basically trying to find a new formula for investing and equity investing in the space. But so spite's a great motivator. I love that. I think that's why we probably get along, which is like there's a little chip on our shoulder saying, no, there is different ways to do things. And I think where we come together, when you said it kind of earlier, is especially, and this is kind of the philosophy on our end, when you're working on hardware, physical tech, real world technologies, like it is a a soup. I always say it's an orchestra, right? It's not a band, it's not a guitarist, a frontman, a drummer, and whatever. Very software oriented. You have a PM, an engineer, blah blah blah. It takes all these different disciplines and all these different instruments to coordinate something complicated to be built, right? And I think if you can't do it better together or collaborate, it's just you see how it fails very quickly. And I think that people call that hard. I guess in society today, that is also very hard for people to communicate, collaborate, and get things done. But maybe that's just an allegory of kind of our industry. But so when you were at that university doing that first project, can you tell us more about how how you got involved with the kind of the original science side of it, the academic side, and the commercial side? Like, just kind of understand that path. And like, as a young person observing, did you find yourself gravitating towards a different part of that innovation or business process that literally like kind of continued your journey?
Yeah. So maybe to put it into perspective, we should start out with how the innovation ecosystem in Denmark was
Yeah.
back in 2014.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because if you were at the university and you said entrepreneurship, you will be pushed out of the room into a back alley somewhere, and then they'll say, "This is where you talk about stuff like this. This is not for academics. This is not something we put center stage, and this is definitely not something we will promote or actively take part in." Because it has always been associated with talent drain, with career dilution, and so forth from the traditional virtues of academia. And when the university got a new president in Anders Bjarkle, who's still serving today, he kind of came from a research, did a spin out, sold a spin out, and now became the president. So he kind of ingrained that entrepreneurship is effectively just a career path for any engineer. And in order for our university to be highly ranked, that has to be an integral part. So effectively, he said that good engineers are product designers that knows how to convert knowledge and science into products. And in order to educate better engineers, we need to implement innovation because that's where you iterate the fastest. And if you look at how a academic textbook is designed or any traditional course, it is you get a challenge, you study it and become an expert, you hand in your essay, you get your feedback, and you're done. And if you look at a textbook of good product design, there's a loop back, right? So we kind of forgot the last step in academia. So 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 what happened early on was really that, hey, this is not working. We are effectively doing everybody we educate a disservice by not including the feedback loop. And that enabled me to kind of be a pioneer within a very old institution that has, all of the bells and whistles when it comes to infrastructure. But when it comes, if you set, business model canvas, nobody had seen it before, right? If you said, "Oh, let's do a financial report," they will just, "Oh, it's just spreadsheets. Marketing is just emails," right? All of these disciplines that are clearly commercial and fundamental for running a business was just not something anybody had any thoughts about, right? So I was allowed to integrate, a legal team that would teach how to do legal contract between founders, how to do formation of companies. I engage with some of the big auditing firms, and they kind of teach you how to do taxation, business plans, and so forth. And everybody thought in the beginning that, hey, the the academic career is heavy enough in training. You don't want to be more in the school bench. And I was like, I don't believe that. So I went from 2 events a year to doing 26. So once a week while the semester was going, and it was fully booked, right? No credits given. This was purely extracurriculum. Those 26 events in 1 year was then transformed into kind of a small internal venture studio that just trained people to become better, right? So effectively, I was existing in this dual phase because my PhD supervisor, I asked him, may I be the national director for student-driven entrepreneurship? He said, no, you don't have time. You're doing a PhD. And I was like, I accept your rejection. So I'll not ask about taking the one at DTU, right? Because then he never said no. So that's how I got involved in it. It was just like, okay, you said no here, then I don't ask over here. And then, this unique timing of having Anders Bjarklev stepping in as the president enabled a entirely new platform could be built from scratch. And that doesn't happen that often, right? And that's, 15 years ago. And it's only been now that the tech transfer law of Denmark is under evaluation, and that's why the new task force has been, collecting over the last couple of months how to do expedited tech transfer terms and contracts. So effectively, we have only seen this transformative change on a national level twice in Danish history, and I so happen to be employed at both times.
Coincidentally, I wonder what the common factor is here. Uh, okay, that's an interesting thing to double click on because you're teaching me this process as we're looking to how how to we know how to navigate here, but how to navigate there is very different. What do you think is the why? So the first imperative, I kind of understand the 2000s. Why? What problem drove this change of uniting and simplifying the tech transfer, licensing, spin out technologies? And I guess we know the obvious, but what's the cultural why? What was the pressure that said, guys, this is too hard, this is difficult? Look, we have hundreds and thousands of universities in the US. There's probably 8 that have very good and simple practices like what you guys are building. What was the impetus that was putting pressure on reform? Because this is one of those things that, yeah, just let it happen. It's fine. Like, just let it go. Once in a while, technology, yeah, lawyers will figure it out. But like, how did this second change, which is happening right now, what's driving the imperative?
That's a very good question. And given that most of this is on a political, behind closed door conversation, I can't really testify to exactly the motivation is. But looking from the outside as an observer, very close to that door, what I believe I sense is that industry has had a kind of a rough time interfacing with academia, especially in the tech transfer domain, because it has been this miscommunication about intent and purpose. So from industry, it looks like it's more of an extractive methodology the universities have used for negotiating, instead of actually transferring the know-how to influence society. So you see that globally, that tech transfer officers have very bad reputations, like across the board. So there's a lot of that of saying, hey, universities, don't be greedy, don't be, and it's always the tech transfer office that are to blame. We forget about that it actually is written in the law how to do it, right? So, but that's a totally different topic. So there were that sentiment of saying industry growing more and more irritated and frustrated with the status quo. And if you look um, across the broad, like globally, and say, okay, which economies have high resilience, which economies are very good per capita, that tends to be an overexposure to IP, right? So Denmark, that is a very small country, very small economy, highly leveraged on IP. It becomes very clear that it is an instrument of how to secure us in a growing and sometime conflict-riddled economy of the globe, right? So it became paramount for everybody sitting around the table that it doesn't help sitting and being angry at each other and pointing fingers. Let's actually sit down and find solutions. And we decided to do that, and we did it in less than 6 months, right? Germany has been working on something similar for, I think it's 2 years now. Uh, but taking those like very big steps and saying, let's remove the emotional part of it and just focus on outcomes. And I think the key thing here was when you hire people in tech transfer offices that are too commercial,
Hmm.
they tend to develop these extractive traits because, hey, I'm a commercial manager. I need to maximize the commercial terms. So what we effectively did at my team at DTU was, hey, let's remove negotiation. Let's put in provide instead. So we don't negotiate IP, we provide our IP. And that changes how you look at the asset that is being transferred, right? And given some tech transfer offices are more of an academic background than it is operator background, they there tends to be massive confusions in what value actually is.
Mm, yeah.
So I mean, somebody like you who has done it before knows that most value created is on the operation side when reality meets reality, right? Whereas the IP from the university, it's early stage, it's probably not going to be the most valuable part in your portfolio of IP because it's not put into reality yet. So taking a step back and just being realistic that, hey, the tech transfer process is not equal to the enterprise value. No, no, it's equal to the asset value that you're transferring, which is one step of often many different IP assets, right? So for instance, the product that I helped make back in 2006, that company ended up having 11 or 12 licensing agreements with the university on top of their own patent portfolio, right? So that's a huge volume IP business they're building up there in order to protect and bring this technology forward. If we just looked at the first IP agreement and said, "Oh, we would need 20% of the company for that one," then that company wouldn't exist today.
Yeah, you said something interesting that kind of sparked my terminology is really important because it's intention, right? Um, Tech transfer is very interesting. You said provide, which is another interesting way to think about it. I never thought about that. We never talked about that. That's interesting as like a behavioral thing. But the translation is the hard part. So there is we always say there is some technologies that are great Lego bricks, and someone invents a new type of Lego shape, a new brick, but how do you translate that into a build that has a business model, a commercial impact, scalability, etc.? Some cases it's obvious, especially in life sciences and things like that. But in the physical tech, mechanical, electrical, sensory, robotics, it's like, okay, we have an interesting set of bricks or brick, and that's one type of person, right? I think what's always interesting for me is understanding who you're supposed to pass the baton to, right? It's like it's a relay race, right? And it's always like, let's call it 4 phases in this relay, right? And academia and research is that first leg. But you have been focusing on the transfer of that baton, but we don't always talk about who it's transferring to, right? And so I think you know this very well because you've been actually playing both sides of how do I sit with one foot in grabbing the baton? How do I work on the transfer of that baton? And then, hey, I'm a builder, operator, founder. Um, and now I need a different set of people to take it the next leg. And there's another leg, another leg. And, you know, I'd love to hear more about now that. Let's double click on that part. What's the next set of things that really needs to happen now that you said, okay, we have this one of the world's best institutions for the first leg. We focused on how to make the handoff of the baton better, but there's no one to hand it off to, or the person running the first leg wants to run the second leg and shouldn't. Like those are very common, the scientist founder situation, right? And at Conduit, we literally tried to play from handoff to first leg to half of the second leg or the first leg, right? That is our whole theory. I'd love to hear more about now as a person who's been through that journey through multiple parts of that process. Like, what is needed? What's the gap? Is it cultural? Is it a system? Is it a reward model? Like, there's a big question. But you and I have been talking about this for 8 months now, and I'd love to get your thought on if Christopher could magic wand that innovation process, that culture of entrepreneurship, the capital market, etc. Like, can you break that down for what's different and unique about what's happening in the Nordics, specifically in Denmark? And where's the opportunity? Like, what's the next opportunity now that you've figured out the handoff part? But is there anyone grabbing the baton on the other end?
I would say the easy one is anybody grabbing it? Not enough, right? So I
Yeah,
may have
tell us more. Tell us more.
I
Yeah.
may have one or two that are good at grabbing the baton, but not 100% success rate, right? And Denmark is a relatively small community, and typically you tend to validate technology to commercial level in your home market, right? And that means if I have very limited industry, very limited uh, um, cash flow in order to play around with, and a incentive structure that does not support risk taking, it means that initial commercial risk stage It's just not something we have a history of doing in Scandinavia, especially in Denmark. Sweden is a little bit better because they have some tax incentives on early shares in companies, so equity positions. That means that you are kind of brought up in a culture where taking risk with capital is more second nature than it would be in Denmark. Um, so if I look at what I believe is missing, then I like to draw inspiration from people who have done it better before. So if I look at an institution like Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, they manage roughly the same patent portfolio as DTU, but their revenue on licensing is 15 times greater. So how come a similar sized institution with similar, products in the bag, but 50 times greater? They must be doing something different. So I started looking into what it is they do that is significantly different than what we do. So they still do the groundbreaking research. They still do a lot of the technology validations. What they have on top is like this commercial level of an organization that is a shared resource across all of the different product verticals. And then they take on all of these small niche products and actually bring them to market within this shared layer, right? And if one product line becomes too big, it's spun out into an independent company, so an SPV, and sold off to a big industry player. So effectively, they have built a machine room of how to build niche products that if they move out of the niche, we just, then it's not our game anymore, right? So they
Yeah.
have built like a factory of companies and products and market entry. So they specialized in the 0 to 1, which is so complicated in the technological valley of death. And they have shared infrastructure and manufacturing, in scaling and stuff like that, right? So each project don't need to reinvest in same infrastructure over and over and over again. So they become capital efficient. And if I look at some other standouts that have done something similar, but in a small scale, then there's a specialized academic outfit in Barcelona, Spain, where they effectively take on the SPVs on the university balance sheet. So they actually make their own companies fully owned by the university. Then they build the product portfolio with however many IP assets across the faculty that makes sense for that one. That also means two projects can share the same IP and so forth. So they can do a lot of optimization on how to build a stable foundation for the company before spinning it up, right? Whereas in Denmark or in most of the Northern European countries, what we would do is that we would effectively say, hey, dear researcher, here's one IP asset that you co-invented, spin that out. That's not necessarily the best foundation, right?
Yeah.
And training an outstanding researcher to become an outstanding salesperson, that's not a trivial assignment, right? And it's definitely not capital efficient, right? So when we're looking in a place where industry moves faster and faster, where iterations become paramount, that they're short and efficient, we're not doing it the right way. And that's where I think the true arbitrage can be put, is that if you put in a framework where you can kind of productize how to do productization, then I think you can absorb many more IP assets and bring sustainable businesses out in the other end at a much higher frequency.
Yeah. I mean, look, now that thesis resonates with me, right? That's essentially our value proposition. We're doing it from the outside because we think that's how you bring the talent to bear, and it's different talent at different time, right? So the other thing that we're observing, or at least I'm observing in our first phase being over and us kind of moving to this next phase, is there's the part of the problem is we're very verticalized. And that's because that's just how it is, right? There's a university here. In the US, there's lots of academic labs, right? And we have a lot of private research labs as well. And what happens is, as an external party, we think we have a few missions, right? And one of our missions on the productization and translation of technologies from IP to product or IP to solution is, okay, how do we gather as many Legos as possible? But the interesting thing for us on our end is, well, actually, that lab has two of the really interesting Legos, and this one over here. And if we mix them together as a third party that's neutral, saying, what are the things I need off the shelf to create and solve this problem or this challenge ahead? But because we're naturally, this one's in this corporate lab, this one's in this academic lab, this one's in a private research organization, those Legos never get to mix until a long time later down the supply chain commercialization path, if they can even make it there. And so one of the things that's been interesting for me and then talking to you is I get to just sit back and like kind of look at all the Legos around the world and go, man, look at all these amazing technologies, but we need to mix them together. And I think our agenda at Conduit is like, how do we act as a, the bin, right? And then say, look, we have really good builders that can map challenges and opportunities in the real world to all these amazing technologies. But most of the time, and I think you can speak to this, and I'd love to, you can't give any specific examples, but like it's nothing different that's happening here. Great piece of single IP or technology comes out of a mechanical, electrical, whatever lab, right? An actuator, sensor, etc. And then it's like, oh, go okay. Now become an entrepreneur to the scientist. That's always a fun one. And sometimes it's there, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, perfect, right? But the reality is, everyone should just be doing what they're good at, right? So let's say they end up raising some capital, $1,000 to go commercialize this technology, and thinking about it's a piece of technology, right? The commercialization pathway for this technology is, how do I get it into a bigger organization or corporate structure or supply chain such that it can scale and more people can play with this technology. But in many ways, we make it, because it's venture, we don't need to get into all that crazy stuff, which is, but also go get revenue and be a vertical company and build the solution for the technology. And you realize, no, this is a Lego brick. This isn't a solution. My job is to take it to that next milestone so it can go into a Bosch, into someone else's supply chain. And I see in Europe more and more and more, there's that gap. I think there's a gap between, do I have a Lego or do I have a full solution? And which pathway should it be on to market? That's one. And I think that's the translation part. But I think the second is like, there's no reward or incentive for someone to go on the journey. And I don't know if that's cultural. You talked a little bit about, financial and maybe incentive, but incentive, that's usually the byproduct for an entrepreneur to do crazy stuff. It happens to be that I got some tax flow, right? To go on the journey of status quo, um, job, corporate, etc., and entrepreneurship. You've been on this journey. You're a multiple founder. You're a venture studio of one in many ways, which is impressive. You have multiple companies you've co-founded in your portfolio right now. Can you double click a little bit? I put a bunch of stuff in there, but I'm trying to pair this idea of the right person for the right phase. And is it a cultural thing or is it a structural thing?
So let's respond in reverse. So
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot there.
yeah, I think it's a combination of a structure and a cultural thing. Because you're brought up in a structure means that many of your traits are kind of force fed to you through the structure, and it becomes a culture, right? So in Denmark, we have a welfare state that is very given. When I tell Americans that we get a student salary to study because we're so privileged in this society, people lose their mind, right? And that's kind of the cornerstone of the Danish society, is that we try not to leave anybody behind. But it also means that you remove some of the desperation some people will have trying to improve their lives, right? So you will lose out, like if you're looking at a bell curve of society, some of the people that are at the bottom of the bell that will grind forever in order to get out of whatever ditch they're in. We don't have the level of people here. But in order to pay for that, we take money from the wealthiest, meaning the generational wealth that flows back into society as investments at high risk is also gone. So we kind of sacrifice two of the extremes that is kind of a hallmark for how to bring, really planet changing technologies to market. It's just not in our DNA to do. The benefit is that because our society is so kind of protective, it also means that in our psyche we can afford to think very, very long term. Like, so you mentioned earlier about how come that you hear so much about the quantum space from Scandinavia? How come some of these, huge impact, sustainability comes from this region? It's because people are not homeless if they don't work. So you can afford to sit and think very big. And and that's why we excel in the research part, right? Because you can afford to sit, and if you fail in your very big thinking, nothing really bad happens. But in order to move for those comfort zones into something painful as entrepreneurship, uh, where there's no one really willing to invest in you, and right, so it's a combination of a societal structure that in the end becomes an incentive structure, but it's also culturally how we are brought up. Right? In Denmark, we have something called janteloven, where we say that people can't say they're better than others. Right? That's frowned upon. It's like a hidden rule, meaning you can't be a standout. And that's the exact opposite of what you would see in an American culture, where you tend to really highlight all of the standouts. You promote a high school dropout that became a billionaire. You promote whoever is dig themselves out of a trends to build an empire and stuff like that. We don't do that in our society, and that means many of our athletes, they are not loud. Many of our TV celebrities, they're not loud. Many of our entrepreneurs are not loud, so you don't see them.
Interesting. As you think forward, right? What's the right? This is a little bit of a leading question, I think. People figure out what we have in common, but how do you marry those two things? As a Canadian in the U.S. right now, it's interesting, right? That the U.S. has changed over the last 18 years that I've been here, culturally, politically, et cetera, et cetera. But let's take all that aside and just look at like innovation, entrepreneurship. There's a reason I'm here, right? Like in Canada's a kind of in between. I like to think of it as between the European kind of that mindset you're talking about and the U.S. economics, and it's basically because it's proximity and to this massive TAM. First of all, it's when you have a massive TAM like the U.S., that's the world's largest eating economy and growing economy. It also has the largest risk capital, right? It just can through distribution. But the flywheel of innovation, aspiration, entrepreneurship, it's not always the great from a societal perspective, right? People work hard and out of the ditches, like you said, because like the other side is no security, right? It is, the number of people here that if you break a leg, you could become bankrupt and homeless, right? Like this are different problems, right? But as a person from the outside, I look at the U.S. now and I think, and we don't need to get political, but it is what it is because that's how this country was created, right? In its DNA and culture. And it has shifted multiple times over the last 250 whatever years. It's like it literally was the person who had to start with nothing to start from scratch, right? And like this mass land, and it was in rebellion to the status quo. So it has created this need for innovation. It has innovated itself into what it is today, and it is part of the culture. And so a lot of us get attracted to it. But I think what happened is we also extracted ourselves from our nations. I think a lot of us are looking back and going, hey, we all left Canada to go to the US, even though proximity wise and economically it's next door. But like, what has that done over like 30 years of all the really good computer scientists and engineers and et cetera leaving Canada and going to the US to work for Twitter, Microsoft, Amazon, whatever. And now you look back and look, we extracted all this resource, right? And I think one of the things that's scary is, okay, how do you become a globally minded innovation platform? That's what Conduit wants to do. How do you pair the right talent at the right time with the right processes such that everybody can win is a hard one. And it's not continues to be extractionary. And I think you and I have talked a lot about this, and I don't know if we're going to come up with an answer until 30 years from now. And hopefully you and I are doing this 30 years from now saying, wow, look at what we did over the last 30 years. And we paired a North American aggressive entrepreneurial mindset and market size with that same culture, and both have benefited. I think that's what the goal is, like between what you and I are trying to create. Can you speak to a little bit of like, as you're one of the few that have kind of seen it as a global lens. What is the path forward? Do you think is the right one for Denmark? And I know you're not running for politics, and there's things you want to say and not say, but like, I think it's not about changing; it's about pairing. And I think you've taught me this by showing me what's capable and what's available, and I think we're going to navigate it together. But love your take on, okay, what is, if you could see the future 10, 20 years from now, what's the future Christopher would want when it comes to deep tech, commercialization, transfer, innovation, entrepreneurship, and culture in general?
So I think the as in the opening statement from you, better together. I think that is the key. I think if you just look at a global map and you kind of map out hotbeds for where certain types of technology excel in certain types of the phases of that technology, so validation, productization, market validation, and scale, that's different. So the global map changes all the time, right? So there will be places where it's better to test and validate one product over another. I think a very good example would be Mash Makes, which is a Danish company that so happens to have their home market in India. And that's because the way that they structured their business model is that their supply chain makes the most sense in India, right? So it's a Danish technology company with all of its operations in India, and it's working towards being the largest carbon sink in Southeast Asia, right?
Wow.
That's what we need. We need to stop focusing on personal enrichment, on these borders that are designed by men many years ago on a map. No, where is the market that is relevant for a given technology, and how do we actually do the impact? And that impact has to be lasting. So the downside of some of the private equity models is that the extraction has to be so fast that it doesn't become lasting. Right? So we also need to respectfully slow down in some cases in order to actually build something that can stand for much longer. And when I retire, what I want to look back on is lasting impact. I don't need to be the CEO of the largest company. I don't need to be have a portfolio of the most companies. I need to be involved in the phase where I create the most value, and then I need to repeat that because that makes me happy. It makes me effective, and it makes the most sense for everybody in the room, right? And that we need to scale not only to me as an individual, but to us as an industry. And here I think entrepreneurs as an industry, because building businesses is like building, brick and mortar. It's like building cars. Doing all of the mechanics of putting together an enterprise that makes sense and is fitted for the market you're servicing is complex, and you need a team to do that. And that team is not bound by any one country. That is what I would like see as a end goal. And in order for a place like Denmark to excel at that, there are some major political challenges. For instance, we have on paper a very nice structure of doing like academic research at the universities. Then we have RTOs, so research technology organizations, that should do the validation and early productization. And then you have the private sector that should take over and actually commercialize. And this looks very good on paper until you realize that all of them are applying to the same grants for the same money to solve the same task. Meaning the private sector is moving into fundamental research, and the universities are moving up in productization, right? We already had designed a theoretically ideal supply chain for it. Why not just use that, right? And that's political, right? Because the structure is there, it's just not used correctly.
That's an interesting observation. I mean, very different from here, right? Because it's one pool of motivating capital, generally, state, generally, right? Or one or two mega corps. Um, Everybody's trying to get access to that capital from a pipeline perspective. So that's interesting. We never talked about this. Like the corporations are coming downstream because they're like, oh, we have a lab and we'll do the incubation, and why don't we get it? And by the way, that just goes into our OpEx of corporax or small business. Meanwhile, you're trying to promote entrepreneurship and like at the end of the day, I think you're trying to figure out tax base and all these other political things and say, hey, what's the best ROI on the investment? But if it's continuing to be only growth capital and innovation capital through state funded means, you're always going to have conflict, right? Is it a matter of the Nordics creating a better blend? I think we're seeing it more of risk capital that's private. Is it better? Is it having a it's going to take years. It's not an overnight thing, but one of the things I've observed through this journey of building Conduit and moving from founder to this other VC kind of thing, and then I've traveled to Canada and Denmark and Asia and all other places. It's like if you abstract the mechanics of that landscape, there's I want to innovate and have impact, and those can be in different sectors. There's I want to innovate and have ROI, and that means return on capital, return on investment. And usually it's the blend. Hopefully it's the blend of the two, right? Like I think we like projects that's the blend of the two. And then there's innovation out of imperative, out of survival, right? But I always look at the waterfall as there's the state, and it has some sort of allocated capital to create a flywheel in society of whatever they want to create. And that usually flows through grants to, scientists and founders and things like that at the right stages. But when it's not paired with a for-profit mindset, right? There's a set of LPs or family offices or corporations who its intent is to both make money and ideally have impact, but make money, that then support a generation of investors who are taking the risk of, hey, if I don't make any money, you don't make any money. And my job is to find the companies and nurture them, et cetera. And then align that with finding the best founders and entrepreneurs to go do that. If you don't have that flywheel of, in our world, LPGP, entrepreneur, how is it ever going to get out of, well, we're just subsidizing the yearly salary for someone to go try as a versus for someone to go win? Do you see that challenge? And as you and I try to figure out how Conduit comes to the Nordics, how are we going to marry these two things together?
Yeah, so the main thing still is in Europe we have a specific law as the only region in the world that says that we can't abuse public funds for overt commercial activities. I don't know who put in abuse in order to build viable enterprises, right? But that's how they chose to phrase that, right? And that means there is this the way we structure innovation is intentionally not commercial, which is the opposite of what innovation is, right? And that means Europe is just at a disadvantage from the way the law is structured or how the words within the law is formulated. And that kills or breaks some of that flywheel effect. And it makes it very, very complex not to have, the middle gap of the financing market, right? So Europe has fairly good liquidity when it comes to the later stage. They have fairly good liquidity and grant structures for the very early stage, but it's the middle gap that kind of misses. And that's what in traditional financing is the risk capital, right? And if you look at our pensions, we do 1/10 of the exposure within risk capital than in the US. And that's the most placing power we have in Denmark. That's our pensions, right? The second one is the foundations. So these large funds, they have historically been afraid of that gap as well. But they're moving closer into it now, and you're seeing the Lego family doing a venture studio. You are seeing the Novo Nordisk Foundation doing it with the BII initiative. You're seeing the Vilum Family Fund doing it with their Power to X framework. So it's beginning, but we're talking less than 5 years of operations across all of these different initiatives, right? So it's new, it's early day. We're beginning to learn that maybe being afraid of the word commercial shouldn't be that bad. But we still need to learn a lot, right? There's a lot of the operations part of this that is still missing. They're still all not invented here mentality across Europe, which is insane given that Europe combined should be one market and not, 27. It's absolutely insane. So I think in order for this to make sense, to do innovation at scale, you need to bring out the technology and find the market that is big enough so it can sustain the cost of actually developing the technology. That could be like with Mash Makes in India. It could also be in North America with some of the large pharmaceuticals and the medtech. So it really depends on the mechanisms, right? And then we need to be less, territorial when it comes
Mm,
to actually bringing technology up.
I love it. I know you and I, we talk all the time and we could talk forever on this stuff. It's kind of like innovation philosophy, so maybe you can write a book over the next 10 years where we can write one together with all of our other fellows. Maybe that's our goal, is to look at all these different innovation cultures around the world and understand, how they've had impact at scale. I usually, we're almost at time, and I know it's late where you are, so thank you for staying up on the almost Christmas week. Um, but one of the things like we always kind of end with or like to share is, and I look at who's listening to this and the analytics, it is a majority of folks who are 23 to 35, kind of hitting that like first phase career or end of the first phase, and are trying to understand like, one, everyone's career journeys aren't linear. Yours isn't linear. Mine's definitely not linear. Um, you know, Kind of words of wisdom, but a little bit of advice on um, exploration, entrepreneurship. I know it's a tough one to try and dive into, but if you can dig into kind of like a few of your learnings around some moments that are maybe serendipitous or things that change your career trajectory, we'd love to just make sure you can share those, and we can always find more time to share those. Um, but I think the biggest comments I get back from people who listen to this are, wow, I didn't even know that that person was actually a screenwriter before they became the CEO of Beats by Dre. That was interesting. I want to dig in more about me and if I want to pivot or move to career. So like you've done that a lot. Love a little bit of words of wisdom from Christopher before we kind of end this conversation.
Yeah, so for me, I think that the silver lining across everything I've done is, when it fits your purpose, things become easier, right? Because it becomes second nature. So the thing I did wrong in some of the dead ends in my career was not to listen to my true north, like not truly listening. Why is it so overly complicated? Why is this, work relationship with this company not really working out? Because it's not meant to be. So you shouldn't be afraid of saying enough is enough. This is not for me. Move away, right? But do not do it hostile. Like be be mild, just not for me. Move on. Good luck. Life is too short to be angry and upset. There's more opportunities out there, and move on to the next one. But saying no was early on. I was brought up in a career where we could fix everything, right? So being in a bad situation just meant that I should work harder to fix it. And that's not necessarily the best outcome for your career, for your health, for your family. So that was a pretty hard learning for somebody that is so hell bent on just fixing everything. That there are some people that don't want to be fixed because they don't agree they need to be fixed. And then we just have different opinions. Fair, move on respectfully, right? The second thing is being adaptable to your situation. You know, one thing is what we believe is going on around us, and then reality hits us, right? We draw up perfect plans. We see a end goal. I studied to become an engineer. I'm sitting doing commercialization activities. It's so far away from what I was actually trained. Like my PhD is in DNA sequencing, right? So doing tech transfer, doing quantum computing, doing biofuels, doing AI. It's so far away from what I'm actually trained in. But having that adaptability to say, okay, here's something that works. for me as a person, but also for the market. So you also have that second angle of there's a response in the other end, so you don't end up in an echo chamber with yourself. And that is something that has, in the later stage of my career, kind of accelerated and put me in way better positions that I feel way more comfortable in.
That is a great place to end this conversation. You've inspired me for the day. This is amazing. Yeah, we'll leave it there. I think just to kind of end this conversation, well, Christopher, have a great holiday season, the rest of the new year. Of course, I'll talk to you probably tomorrow or in the coming weeks. And I'm excited for 2026. Our goal in this next phase of building Conduit and what we are as that second baton handler, I guess, or that risk capital in the middle is how do we support, honestly, folks like you. You are us. So, like I think Conduit turned out to we have a mission, but there's a lot of weirdos out there like us who like to play that second phase. And I'm so happy that we met like a year ago and we built this kind of friendship and relationship working together. And we're our goal is to be out there and to try to bring our platform and a bridge, and we call it a corridor between what you're doing there and what we're doing here, and try to figure out the better together. It's going to be messy, it's going to be hard, it's going to be different. Different's not always the easiest, but I'm excited to go on the journey with you, and I know the rest of the team is. So really excited for Q1, Q2, and hopefully we're hitting the ground running, building new ventures in the Nordics, in Denmark, right, in Copenhagen. With that, I'll see you in 2026, my friend.
Yeah, will do, Amish. Take care and enjoy the holiday.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers.